Oops. Okay, you good? Okay. All right, good morning. This is Senate Natural Resources and Energy, and this is Tuesday, January 20th. And we are starting this morning with S213, about smart meters on public water systems as well as cybersecurity issues. And we have a few folks to hear from this morning, so we're gonna just go right down the list as it appears on my agenda, starting with Mr. Duncan from the Champlain Water District. Welcome.
Thank you.
Maybe we can take a second to just introduce ourselves, so you know who you're speaking to.
Sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
Good morning. Hi, I'm Snre from the Addison District.
I'm Terry Williams from the Walton District.
Ann Watson from the Washington District.
Sorry, Paul, that's from the Bennington District. Scott Van Caledonia District.
Morning. As mentioned, Joe Duncan, General Manager, Champlain Water District. We provide wholesale water to most of Chittenden County, 18,500 people, excluding the Burlington area. So thank you for the opportunity to be here today to speak about this. The concepts of metering and smart metering are obviously very important to not only the water systems, but also the customers as well. Keeping customers informed about what is going on and what is happening is definitely very important for public water systems to communicate. The piece for this is that I do believe that most of the water systems that we're talking about that implement this and that this would impact are municipal water systems, municipalities that have the ability to create policies, make rules and regulations that would speak to the stuff that you're talking about. And in fact, most of the systems that we serve, the Champlain Water District, have policies like this in effect, where they notify people of what changes are in the system. They also have policies in place where there are people who, for a variety of reasons, may or may not have a smart meter or a remote meter reading system in their home, in implementing that. So I'm not really, for me at least, it's a bit of a challenge to understand why the state would step in on something like this. I do understand that the Vermont gas and electric industry have a regulation similar to this. And to me, it sort of makes sense that would have that, because there's no place for someone to go to a public board locally to say, I want to influence this, and perhaps they have to go to the public service board, as compared to, say, the city of South Burlington, for example. Someone could go to the city council, talk to the city council about putting policies in place that would address sort of these things. And so just sort of that's sort of my big picture set of things. From an infrastructure standpoint, water meters are, at the current state, much different than where they are in the world of gas and electric meters. It pretty much is a one-way street of information of those meters to the reading system. It's all done over encrypted radio. In fact, we actually have to buy the right equipment from the manufacturer to read that encrypted radio, because they don't give it away for free. You have to use theirs. The other thing is when people go out and read those, when our staff or any water system goes out and reads those, the information they get from a smart meter is the meter ID number, nothing that ties it to the home in any way, shape, or form as a piece of data, sole piece of data. They also get the meter reading. And the thing about the smart meters that makes them smart, at least in their current state, is the ability to tell if there is a usage anomaly. So smart meters are basically have little chips in them that are telling them, is there a usage that's outside the norm? And the reason for that is so that if someone reads that data and gets that flag, they can take a look and say, oh, you know, this person's had high usage for several days consistently. And the goal there is to basically be able to go back to the user and say, hey, we flagged this, we saw this, we wanted to tell you this, perhaps it's a leaking toilet, perhaps you have a leak in your home, and we'd like you to check that so that we don't give you a $2,000 bill in 3 months that everyone is surprised by. So to me, the term smart is, I guess, used loosely in my mind. But the big thing is once that data is collected through a radio read, It is then brought back, and I'm not aware of any fixed network radio reads. Shelburn's the only one that I'm aware of that's currently putting in a fixed radio read system that would actually be able to read stuff real time on a daily minute basis. Even then, they only plan on reading it monthly, just because of bandwidth and capacity, but still doing quarterly billing just because of bandwidth and capacity. So it isn't like there's something that's there that's talking back and forth on a constant daily minute to minute basis. And so what happens is that data is then collected and brought back to a piece of infrastructure that's on the business side of the house. And in the business side of the house, it is then correlated, the water meter is then correlated in a system that's within the municipality's network that links that water meter to somebody's home and a bill and an address. And typically, in some places do things a little differently. Typically, it's the same information that's in your tax database, it's the home. There are some variabilities with that, but typically it's the property owner that is the bill payer because that's how deeds can be put on properties. But that's the first point in time where somebody's personal information is then linked to that. And that's not done through the radio, it's not done out in the web out there. But what can happen is at that point in time, once you're inside that piece of infrastructure, that billing stuff can then have a place where information for people's billing, if people want to pay online, they want to pay through ACH transactions, some of that information then may be available within that. At no point in time does that make its way from that in-home structure back to that water meter or through any transfer of data. And there is a world of cybersecurity where I think, maybe not necessarily in this particular bill it would be, but somewhere in some sort of regulations where communities who do take any bill of private information for money should have some sort of measures in place that protect that, similar to what's done in hospitals or anywhere where you're making online payments or whatnot. So to me, the cybersecurity piece is very important. It's certainly critical in the world that we live in. I don't necessarily see it being critical to smart meters, probably more on the pay side of things. So that's just sort of the world that I'm used to seeing and is living in. Want to just present that here, give you some perspective of what the lay of the land. You'll probably hear some more things to see what the system that might be talking.
Thank you. Thank you. So Champlain Water District, what towns do you serve?
We serve Shelburne, South Burlington, Winooski, Colchester, Essex Town, Essex Junction, Williston, Milton, and the village of Jericho.
Okay, so mostly, I mean, by Vermont standards, kind of suburban towns.
Yes,
yeah. Do you have smart meters throughout all those towns?
Not all of them, no. I would say half of them have, or some of them are converting, but only half of them actually are fully implemented.
Okay, and do you allow customers to opt out if they don't want them? And you mentioned and do you charge them for the cost of that opt out?
Yes.
So you already do part of what's in this bill. Do you you mentioned about the reading of the smart meters and that the only system that has one where you can read it remotely is Shelburne. So how do you read the other ones?
You do read it remotely.
Oh.
A fixed network, so what we do is we have, and there's a couple different ways you can read them, right? There's the old school way of actually back in the day, you go in and knock on someone's door, go in the basement.
Yeah.
read it, or someone would write it on a card and give it to you and
Yeah.
accept that.
Yeah.
Then we moved to touch pads. So there's a little pad outside the door, you'd walk up to it with a wand, touch it with the wand, that data would be transferred into that. Then we're into drive-by radio systems where it's basically just a larger receiver with a stronger signal off of the meters, and you can drive around and pick up several hundred in a block, or maybe even 1,000 in a block, depending.
So like you have a truck that goes around and that's how you're doing it in most places except for Shelburne?
And then Shelburne is actually doing a fixed network where they are putting radio towers at key locations. I think they've got 9 radio towers that to put in that will basically read all the radios in lieu of driving around.
Sophisticated Shelburne.
Yes.
So, I introduced this bill as because I had a constituent who was concerned and didn't want to have a smart meter, and he was like, if I don't have to have it for electric and gas, I shouldn't have to have it for water. And he didn't want to have to pay to have not have a smart meter. But in talking to water systems, it sounded like there are costs if somebody doesn't have a smart meter, so I added that in the bill. But there were also concerns about cybersecurity, and you mentioned those, and this has been a thing that's come up several times in the media recently about cybersecurity and water systems. And so what's in the bill is just the first crack at trying to get at that, basically making sure that water systems have cybersecurity protocols. And then you bring up another one, which is consumer data privacy, you know, because you have a lot of information about somebody, where they live, and you know, their billing information and all that stuff. And so what protocols does your system use for both those things? They're linked, but a little bit different.
Yeah, they are. So when it comes to the meters in someone's home, there is no link to the business infrastructure from that radio read, from going and reading the meter. There is no link to that. If someone's just driving around getting that information, and or the Snre with that as a future possibility. There is also no link from that reading that meter to the operations side of things. So for us, there's cybersecurity on the operations side. If you're making water, you have things that are treating water, pumping water around. We consider that our operations network. And then obviously the business network is the part of the house where it's, you know, our financials, people's financials, billing, all of this stuff. And so those two worlds do exist. It is a whole different dialogue on the operations piece, but the operations piece is the scariest piece, because that is where your water is being made and controlled, and people can do different things to it if they want to change how chemicals are being introduced and stuff like that.
Right.
Champlain Water District happens to be air gap, so our operations are not tied to the internet. That said, it's becoming more and more challenging to do that, because that's a whole, I don't know how much you want to get into it, but there's a whole story of what's required for cybersecurity for operations networks, including stuff like we buy monitors now. We have to buy monitors that have no smart chips in them at all, because if you have a smart chip in there, a lot of them are Wi-Fi. If they're Wi-Fi, someone can come in, find that, get on it, and then be inside your network.
Yeah.
And so air gapping becomes more and more challenging. Then there's a whole different world of creating different blocks for accessing operations. And one of the challenges for small systems in this operation side of things is that there's a world where getting people to respond at night, to go and see things at night, the convenience of remote logins and remote operations is critical for a lot of small infrastructure, because Champlain Water is for staff 24/7. That's something that we're capable of doing, but not everyone's capable of doing that. So to have an operator get a call in the middle of the night, he or she can look up and say, oh, that's what's going on there. My urgency level is high, low, whatever it is. Maybe I can even change something while I'm here. And how do you manage that risk? And I think that was a big nut that's trying to be cracked. I'm actually the water wastewater representative for the cybersecurity advisory council for the governor, and that's a major topic that's being talked about right now, is how to deal with that.
So you don't have it.
There are ways to get there.
Are there standard requirements right now?
There are not standards right now, and that's one of the things that we're advocating for, are cybersecurity standards on the operations side. There are policies, guidelines that say CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency.
Yeah.
They have standards. EPA has standards. There are standards that people should follow. There's nothing driving or requiring people to follow them at the moment.
Right, so this bill is a vehicle for that. So do you have recommendations for it?
I
mean, what's in here is just a first crack,
My
so.
professional opinion is to definitely decouple the meter reading requirements as far as, because I don't see the meter reading in any way of cybersecurity.
Yeah, and I hear that. So, but if we were to move forward with the cybersecurity for water systems, what would you recommend?
There should be, and I'm not sure if it comes through, and this is one of the questions that's sort of been at the Cybersecurity Advisory Council is does it come from sort of the computer side of things, or does it come from the drinking water side of things, where there's some basic guidelines and standards that people have to follow? But either way, there should be some base level requirements, which those base level requirements should be. I mean, one of the biggest things is, the simplest thing is if you don't have multi-factor authentication on your stuff, you should have it. I mean, that's a base level thing that a lot of people don't even.
For pretty much everything. these
Yeah,
days.
and you'd be surprised how many water systems don't have
Yeah.
it. So that as a base level requirement isn't very overbearing. You know. Basically what you wanna do, and there is a whole guide for setting up base level cybersecurity measures. And I think there's a bunch of stuff in there from, password requirements, requirements for timelines for changing your passwords.
Yeah.
MFA, those base level things would go a long way with a lot of small water.
So if systems aren't doing these things now. Us requiring them to do them would potentially be helpful. But what are the thing, who is making the requirements that we should say you should follow these?
You would think that in the water wastewater world, it would come from A&R. But there's also sort of a question of, this is what the Cybersecurity Advisory Council is sort of talking about, is there are global sectors that everyone would have the same requirements on, health, power, electric, all your critical infrastructure elements. Do they all fall under the same umbrella of
Yeah.
need? Does that come from some central piece, or do you then look at it individually where you say, well, if electric falls under DPS, then do it under public service, and if water falls under that, do it under A&R. That answer hasn't quite gotten there, and I think
Okay.
someone who might be able to answer
Okay.
that, if you come along.
I'll be
But
patient.
but I would definitely say there should be a driver, and again, the piece to it is, I think you have to look at how hard of a lift it is to get there. I think what most people think is cybersecurity as some heavy investment of money to get there, when really it's, a lot of it is diligence and practice with a little bit of
Yeah.
a low level investment in some, someone to set up those protocols for how to access your
I
information.
mean, multi-factor ID is. Doesn't cost you anything, and if there are water systems out there that are not doing that, then that's
Then you should
problematic.
be able to get that.
Yeah.
And there are people that can assist with that. And there are, we always advocate to, Champlain Water is larger than this, but knowing that there's a lot of small systems out there, we always advocate for, if there's money that comes in through EPA or through other things, to do some set asides to, help people understand what it would be to write that package of what they need for a cybersecurity policy for practice. And once you do that, it's really not hard, it's just a matter of time.
Yeah. Okay,
But it's also interesting too, because water systems, some of them live alone, like Champlain Water District, its own municipality. The village of Jericho, their mission is water only, but you get to something like the town of Essex, and the town of Essex, they should have a communications department or an IT department. And it's something that they have to look at globally for how they put that into effect. And that's where it sort of, does the regulation come from water? Does it not come from, does it come from A&R? Does it not come from A&R? Because it does cross over a lot of different places where what are municipalities doing for protection of information, what they, if they're collecting taxes or collecting online permit payments. How is that data information protected?
but the regulator for those things are different. But, so a lot of times these things have to rest with the regulator, and the regulator for water systems is A&R.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, been where the Cybersecurity Advisory Council has sort of kind of crossed over into, is it global, is it sector specific, and that answer hasn't come, but that it probably ends up in where people can influence the fact change was probably on that regulatory basis.
So before we get to Senator Williams, I just, as a follow-up, you mentioned that there is a guide on cybersecurity protocols. Then I imagine the guide that you're referring to is for water systems. Or is it more general than that?
There are a couple different ones out there, and I should have been a little bit better prepared to give you the specific resources for them. I can share them with you afterwards.
That would be great.
There are ones that are, there's ones that you can walk through a 6-program module, and it's not system specific, but it has all the stuff for it. And then there are ones that are water specific, or we
Okay.
wastewater specific, because that's the realm that A&R covers.
So. Given that there's multiple, I mean, and we can see, if you're able to send these to us, you know, we'll check them out, that would be amazing. I lack of a better term, like who owns those, like where do those guides come?
One of them is CISA, which is a government agency that, interestingly enough, has been decoupled completely from regulatory enforcement. So they basically live in a world of coming in. They have no ability. One of the things in Vermont that's a challenge is, and it's not just Vermont, but tends to be in Vermont, is if people know that they tell you something that might lead to them getting, either slap on the hand or something else, they don't share that information. CISA comes in and they have no skin in the game on them to help you with what it is. So CISA has a handbook and guideline that walks you through how to set up a cybersecurity policy.
And CISA is or was the state organization or a federal?
Federal.
It's federal, okay.
Yeah. It's I think it's came through DHS, Department of Homeland Security originally.
And still exists.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ask that and it's
Verify that.
There was a Vermont representative out in Gamlin who is the CISA rep, up to Vermont.
Okay, and so they're there to assist.
Yeah.
Okay,
And then there's another one, I forget the name of it, a university that put together, basically a six piece module.
Okay.
To walk you through that, and I can share that with you as well.
okay, that's great, thank you. Senator Rhodes?
So back to this security mindset, is a lot of people just have a concern about where this data is being used over there. You know, when you hear about smart TVs and smart refrigerators, you know, Alexa and Siri, you think that people are snooping on, okay? So where does the data get used? Just internally by you, is it consolidated and used by any state agency?
Not that I'm aware of, obviously, there is a world of it being sort of, I guess, public record, and we haven't been asked to, transmit any of that information. But if we did, I think we would kind of get into the question of what would need to be redacted that go along with some of that. But for us, it's all internal. There's nothing external, or nothing that we ship out as a state. There's no reporting that goes back to the state with any of that information, any of that.
So like smart meters, net meter, when that first came out, a lot of people opted out because they were concerned about how the data was gonna be used as far as the businesses go. And I do remember there was a lawsuit, right after, because I opted out on it, except for about where my solar panels are. And somebody used that to compile and made that farm look like they were using way too much energy. I think that was the basis for the suit, so I can see what people would be concerned.
Oh, 100%. It definitely is. Privacy is important, right? The crazy thing is when you pick up your cell phone and you make a call, you probably transmitted more information across that than we ever pick up on radio read meter. But basically, that is what it is. It's literally the information if someone is concerned about their water meter information getting out there, the only information that there is how much water they use. And it is a one-way street for information, and it is encrypted radio. So, and we are the ones that receive it off of there. And if someone is concerned about, hey, you just told me I'm using this much water, can you come and do a physical read? We can go in and physically read it to make sure that what the radio read or told us is actually what's on the meter. So unless someone's been in there, it's a one-way street, so unless someone's been in their home, and I don't even know how there's no real way to monkey around with it too much other than ripping it apart, which would be obvious someone gives something that you would have the ability to say someone manipulated my data to give me a higher bill. So. Yeah.
I had a follow-up question, now it's gone. That was best. Yes, go ahead.
You can just go to the meters, opt out. In your district, how many people have opted out of meters now, or how
So
is that for you?
So I didn't quite get all the information. So we manage South Burlington, but we own Colchester. We own 2 systems in Colchester. Of those that we did, we have about 2,000 counts, and we have 5 people that have opted out. Some of them opted out, not necessarily, I would say this. We have 3 that have opted out. 2, we don't have the meters on there because we haven't figured out a way to get into their crawl space to actually choose out their meter. To physically get to it and swap it out.
So if you have only like 1 or 2 people who are doing this, they're gonna pay a lot.
So what we do is we charge them $50 a read. And
And they still want.
and they still want, and the reason we charge $50 a read is because our person now has to
Yeah.
get out of the truck. You know, whereas everybody else, we've got it. We then have to manually enter it into the system. It doesn't come in with all the other meter read stuff, so when it does get back, it gets handled by our admin person slightly differently, so it's touched by a bunch of different people, and so we try to aggregate what that.
If you were a shelter with a more sophisticated system, you have to send somebody out just. for the-
Yes, it wasn't somebody driving by,
Price would go up.
I would assume
Because
so.
of that, yeah.
And the reading is monthly,
For us, we read quarterly,
okay, so then, so court,
and I believe, my understanding, once Shelburne's system is in, they're gonna read monthly just so they can. And their goal is to just look at data for basically those anomalies, to kind of say, hey, somebody, and the goal there is to help the user. I mean, it's to the water system's advantage to let a leaky toilet leak from a money perspective, not from a conservation perspective, so you gotta get involved in this.
and just to follow up, I did remember my question, so none of the municipalities in the Champlain Water District are data brokers, like you're not selling our data.
Correct.
And I'm just thinking out loud here, but there's nothing. There's nothing that I know of that would prohibit. Or is there something that would prohibit a water district from becoming a data broker?
I don't know the answer to that one. I can tell you that that would not be a policy that we would want,
Right.
but I don't really know that realm enough to say. I would hope that most water systems are within municipalities that have stuff like tax data and finance data, that would be a policy they have in place that they're not doing that, but can't say.
I would imagine, I can't imagine anyone doing that, but I'm just thinking out loud that there's nothing prohibiting them right now.
I mean, the stuff that we do with the data is we have residential customers, commercial customers, industrial customers, government customers. And we may take all that data and lump it in and try and analyze what the world is looking like for trends of usage. But we never go and look like, I'm curious what Joe Duncan is using in South Burlington. And see what his data is specifically, and then try and give that to someone out in the world. But we definitely use the data for trending, but it's on a very high level.
Sure.
Regular customer levels.
I know people that told me that they didn't go with the net meters because they knew the utility person that read the meters and they're afraid he's gonna lose his job. So, people get attached to the people that show up there and want to read the meter, I guess, but.
Interesting.
That is certainly, I mean, you certainly don't want to replace people with technology, right, from an employment perspective. I can tell you that from a water system perspective, if you can read the meters quickly, you're not letting people go, because those people are gonna go and do something more proactive or maybe possibly reactive, than walking around door to door.
Great. Any further questions about this? Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. I will get that, and I will email the information on how to write a policy and what modules are out there for that. And if there's anything else you need, please take a look me up.
Super, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, so next we're gonna move to Liz Royer from the Florida Water District. Welcome. You heard our introductions earlier.
Yes.
Yes.
So hi, my name is Liz Royer. I'm the executive director of the Vermont Rural Water Association. We are a nonprofit organization that supports all public drinking water and wastewater systems through technical assistance, training, advocacy, and outreach. We represent over 320 system members that protect public health and allow for economic development in our towns and municipalities. These small rural utilities provide safe drinking water and return clean treated wastewater to rivers and lakes throughout the state. Since 2020, I've also served as the chair of Vermont Water, which is Vermont's mutual aid and emergency response network for water and wastewater systems. Vermont Water has been active in recent years with flood events, contamination incidents, drought, and cybersecurity outreach. So Chair Watson, thank you for having me here today and allowing me to share our thoughts on metering and cybersecurity on behalf of all of the public drinking water systems in the state. As a reminder, public system does not mean publicly owned, even for community water systems. So there are just over 400 public community water systems in Vermont. A community system means that there are at least 15 connections, or they serve a residential population of at least 25 people. So less than 1/4 of all community water systems in Vermont are owned by a town, village, or city. So when we say municipal, you generally think of town, village, or city. We also have about 72 fire districts, which are officially municipalities, but typically when you think of, they don't have a town government infrastructure, they don't have folks in the town office that are helping them with certain things. Well, in some cases, yes. So the fire districts do use the town offices to do their billing and other functions, but generally they're completely separate, they're governed separately. So that means over 3/4 of water systems are owned and governed outside of a traditional town municipal structure. So fire districts, homeowner associations, water co-ops, manufactured home communities, those make up the majority of community water systems in Vermont. And those systems are often operated by a part-time contractor who may or may not be at the system on a daily or even weekly basis. So these are typically not organizations with the capacity to consider billing structures, meter upgrades, and cybersecurity threats. And actually many of the small rural systems that we work with are not metered at all due to the expense of installing and maintaining meters. There are some requirements for certain loans and grants that they did have to put in meters, but a lot of times they put them in to meet the requirement and then they don't have the time or folks available to go and read the meters. So yes, it's a struggle. Vermont has to be unique in many ways, and this is another one of those things. So regarding S213, we appreciate the opportunity, thank you, to review several drafts of this bill and appreciate that our initial concerns have been addressed. In further research on smart meters, it's become apparent that these are not the same level of smart as meters used by the gas and power companies. Water meters, we don't have the ability to shut off service for the water meter, as somebody has to physically go there and turn the valve to shut off water in this case. So smart water meters are typically radio read and contain very minimal data. It's often just a number that represents the water usage of the household, as Joe mentioned earlier. So this poses a very minimal risk in terms of cybersecurity threats to both the customer and to the system. With very little information actually being shared through this process. Our experience with cybersecurity for water systems began with my role as Vermont Warren Chair, and working with partners to identify risks and create classes that would resonate with small water and wastewater systems. Most cybersecurity trainings on the national and on the state level are tailored to an audience of IT professionals. In Vermont, to my knowledge, only one water system has an IT professional on staff that works in-house. That's Champlain Water District, which is the largest water provider in the state. And assisting with cybersecurity evaluations and assessments of small systems, we became aware of other concerns. Even for systems that have an IT consultant or a company that they work with through their town office, those providers are focused on, risks through emails, file storage, and they aren't concerned with SCADA and other types of operational technology and controls. The operators we spoke with were frustrated that their town managers and other town officials didn't really understand the need to budget for upgrades and improvements to address current and future cyber threats. In October 2024, Vermont Rural Water was selected as one of 2 states to host a pilot project focusing on cybersecurity at small municipal drinking water systems. We were trained by EPA headquarters staff CISA, that, the agency that Joe talked about earlier, Water ISAC, which is a, group of organizations and agencies, that looks at water, infrastructure challenges, DC Water, the City of Washington DC, and other leading agencies and organizations to provide on-site technical assistance for cybersecurity. This experience has expanded our knowledge and awareness of the many threats faced by our small water systems. We learned that the threat actors typically cast a wide net, and while Vermont systems typically wouldn't be specifically targeted, they look for any systems that have an easy path to infiltrate. So regulation and enforcement of cybersecurity would be a mistake in our opinion. Cybersecurity is multifaceted, multi-layered, and constantly evolving. Federally, EPA has backed away from mandates and requirements and has focused their programs on outreach. We have seen the need for more on-site technical assistance and accessible funding to maintain equipment, update software, and provide additional training. I did have a thought when we were talking about MFA, multi-factor authentication, and it would be a great requirement that we have quite a few systems that have such old and outdated equipment that, you know, like one of the first things that CISA will recommend when they're at a system is to make sure that you've installed all of your patches, so you've updated all of your software. There's quite a few systems that have such an old operating system that they are not able to do any updates. So even something as basic as adding MFA might be a challenge because everything I have is so old. Let's see. So the more funding to maintain equipment, update software, and for additional training is needed, not just for the system operators, but also for town officials, engineers who work with these systems and design these systems, and service providers who may be called on for assistance. An example just from a couple weeks ago, I was at a brand new wastewater treatment plant, and the system had been designed to have their HVAC system had remote access enabled, so the HVAC company could remote in and control that system, and again, that's a concern. It could easily access other systems in theory, and so luckily the town manager was able to say no, we're gonna disable that function. We do not want that. But as technology improves, it's, you know, everyone's tendency to get the newest and best, and part of that is the Bluetooth and remote accessibility for all types of equipment. So while many resources already exist, there are very few options for small Vermont systems who want to design practices and procedures that work for the unique needs of their small system operations and management. We view townwide tabletop exercises as the best way to communicate, plan, and coordinate local resources during a cyber threat. Water and wastewater systems are often left out of local and regional conversations on many topics, including emergency planning, hazard mitigation, and cybersecurity. It may not be clear to town officials why the water or wastewater operators should be involved in a townwide tabletop, but the water plan and the water infrastructure are likely to be the #1 target for many towns. Multiple incidents have been reported recently at Vermont water and wastewater facilities, which is likely a fraction of the true total. While the situations vary, there are some common themes. Vermonters are generally very trusting and very proud of their facilities. So if someone calls them up and they say, oh, I want to come and tour your wastewater plant, they're like, okay, great. Nobody ever wants to visit us, right? So they're excited about that opportunity. So there's often doubt. I think it's human nature that there was an issue. I don't know, was that my fault? Did I do something? I messed that up. I don't want to get in trouble. I'm just gonna let this go. So there's some foreign entities that are known to kind of infiltrate systems and then just hang out and wait for another situation to potentially happen, and then they could potentially lock up water systems across the whole country. So, we may have a lot of cybersecurity concerns at the moment, but we don't really know the true picture. Operators often want to call someone that they know and someone that they trust to discuss, these issues. Again, they don't know if something really happened. Is it something, who should I call? I don't know, I'm not gonna just call the FBI, right? That's one of the recommendations, but nobody wants to do that. there's often a current or former employee involved in some potential threat. That's something that we've seen quite a few times happen in Vermont. Maybe somebody, is retires or, leaves, and maybe they're not disgruntled at that moment, but later on they become disgruntled, and then they still have passwords and access to banks. Process and protocols often don't exist. We're working on that. We're trying to help everyone develop some protocols, or they may be overlooked. So just let me provide you with a couple examples from here in Vermont. In one town, a former administrator gained access to wastewater facilities and equipment after he was no longer employed there, both physical and online. In another example, a Vermont operator noticed unexplained mouse movements on their desktop. While they initially dismissed the movement as IT doing some maintenance on their system, further investigation revealed that there were multiple interconnected systems that ended up being compromised. There was an industrial pre-treatment facility. This was in a different town than where the wastewater plant was, but they lost their process control. They were eventually forced to report due to loss of data. But they were not planning to notify the downstream municipal wastewater plant of the potential impacts because they didn't even consider that could be a risk. And finally, a potential threat actor recently posed as an industry salesperson to gain physical access to a municipal wastewater plant. This person was given a tour and took photographs of the facility and equipment, and then they disappeared and they didn't even provide any contact information. So these are just a few of the many recent examples that we are aware of. So what's the solution? Operators are overwhelmed with a growing number of threats. We suggest that they focus on the basics, MFA, just personal cyber hygiene, being able to recognize a phishing email, that type of thing. Developing protocols and procedures for when employees leave. Password management, there's been quite a few systems that we work with that still have default passwords from the manufacturer for the equipment. There was a big cyber attack recently that's all they did. They just went around to every water system online and put in the default password for a piece of equipment for a PLC controller. And they were able to hack in because so many still have that default password from the manufacturer. Ongoing training and awareness obviously is very important, especially for these very small systems where they don't have anybody trained or anybody with IT staff. Moving forward, the best option for building ongoing relationships and sharing resources is again that townwide cybersecurity tabletop, especially with involvement from the local emergency management director, the select board, fire and police, water and wastewater, of course, and other local officials and legislators. We believe that cybersecurity in Vermont water systems can be improved by partnering with many organizations and agencies that offer training and outreach, along with direct technical assistance from a trusted and knowledgeable provider. So I'd like to share two resources with you. I will put the links in my written testimony. Just remembering, again, Vermont has very unique concerns. There's a lot of resources, protocols, assessments, procedures, all these things available nationally that we have had to spend a lot of time rewriting, and so they're understandable and make sense for Vermont systems that are so small. Again, there's no IT professional there. There's often not an operator there every day, right? So who is the person that's going to manage this and keep an eye out for potential risks? So I will. So we have our cybersecurity page. I think it probably has a couple of the protocols and procedures that Joe mentioned. And then we also have another page that we've developed for local officials, state officials regarding housing and development. So we believe that these two resources can inform many discussions here in the State House. Thank you for allowing me to speak on behalf of our state's drinking water systems. We appreciate this committee's efforts towards improving public health and protecting the environment as we all work together for Vermont's future.
Thank you. Question here.
Thank you for the testimony.
Yep.
So, the Rutland delegation toured the Rutland water system.
Mhm.
And one of the things that was brought up was the Vermont National Guard, as part of their civil defense mission, they actually had 20 years ago, so they have that facility on their list, and they used to go and train there. And it's like, you did? Why'd they do that? Well, because you want to disable a city from contaminating the water,
Yes,
any of the infrastructure, power. So I'm glad to hear that. You guys have got that on the radar,
yes,
because I don't think it's on the national guard radar.
no.
Thanks, Liz. I appreciate it. And also thank you for your communications while I was developing the bill. I wanna, just make sure I understood one of the things you said, and I haven't read your testimony, but, it sounded like you said you don't think there should be requirements for cybersecurity and that there should just be training.
I don't think it should be regulation and enforcement, because, you know, the core of the issue is everybody wants to do better and improve their cybersecurity, but because of the age of their equipment, or they're not able to update their software, there's just so many things that come into play. And even, you know, yes, we need more funding to do all these things, but, you know, there's just community water systems, there's 400, right? So to be able to go out and assist and help them install whatever, MFA, or, you know, it's just to have a new regulation go into place, it's gonna be too overwhelming for systems. There's not enough folks to go out and help them, there's not the resources available to ANR to help with that. They are during the sanitary surveys, which is the inspections that every water system goes through, they do have discussions, right? That's required. That the inspector has the discussion with the system about cybersecurity and what they're doing and what more they should do. And they're always encouraged to do these kind of full assessments. A lot of these nationwide tools that have been developed and assessments that have been developed are kind of overkill for the systems that we see in Vermont. And like we're saying, they just need to focus on, you know, the very, very basics, change your passwords, do the multi-factor authentication, you know what a phishing email is, you know, take away access when your employees leave, that type of thing. And so what, you know, officially these lists are just way too much. It's like, they're not gonna do anything then, right? If we just start with, you know, here's 5 simple steps that you can take, you know, we'll eventually get somebody else to help you do these things, then we could actually make some progress, I think.
It seems to me though that if things are not required, there's not a push to do them, because people are like, well, I don't really have to do that. And the bill is actually has the secretary, has ANR developing guidelines, actually based on the guidelines that are on GET, because I was looking for something and you had them posted, so based on your guidelines, so they would be Vermont specific and, you know, not the overkill of the national scene. And, you know, they would be regulatory in that they would live at ANR that oversees water systems, but it just seems to me that if we want them to happen, we need to say, you gotta do this, because people, yes, get overwhelmed, they get busy, or they think it's not important, and then they don't do it. And so that seems concerning to me. But then the other thing I wanted to ask you is, Senator Watson and I worked on a big bill a few years ago that required more people being involved in emergency planning at the municipal and the regional level. And I thought that water systems I thought that was one of the things we added, but I can double check that or ask the attorneys to look at that for us. But if we didn't add them, that's an easy thing to add to the municipal and regional planning, is that when they do planning, they have to include the water, wastewater systems.
Yes, and my biggest concern is that if working through VLCT or through the regional planning commission, they're working with town. The town offices may not even know if there's a fire district or a water co-op or another, they don't look at all of the community water systems in their town. They're gonna look at what's the town system.
Yeah, I mean, my town is a great example. I live in East Middlebury and we have our own water system in the East Middlebury, and Middlebury, which is the big town, has their own water and wastewater system. So probably when they do planning, they forget that little East Middlebury has its own little system, and we don't have meter. The pretty basic system.
Yeah.
So I think it's a good example, but just sort of requiring that towns, when they do planning, look, include all of the water systems in town.
Yes.
I think if that doesn't already exist, adding that would be an easy. It would certainly be easy in the statute now, implementing it would be a different thing, but.
Right, yeah, yes, but again, like you're mentioning, having the bigger kind of a requirement is gonna give that extra push for things to actually happen, so. I think I just, in terms of cybersecurity and adding regulations, I'd love to hear Ben's opinion from A&R on that, but also just knowing how challenging it is going out there and talking to the systems, and I think we are making progress in terms of you may not be targeted, you're just a little Vermont system, but they're not looking at what size the system is and where it's located. They're just like, who has this default password? And
Right.
they're gonna attack them, right? So I think awareness is definitely improving. Especially with the small Vermont systems, they see that there could be a threat. We've done a lot of trainings in the past year where people are like, wow, this is terrifying. Like, yes, that's.
Yeah,
it's
there have been a
terrifying.
lot of things in the past year. That's terrifying.
Yeah, it's the best.
So I will one interrupt here.
No.
So just to follow up on that, one of the things that I'm having, I guess I still have some questions about, so your guidelines have that people should, these systems should have multi-factor authentication. But I'm also hearing from you that there are some systems that are so old that it's not possible to have multi-factor authentication.
Yes.
This might be too in the weeds, but for those systems that are that old, are they also internet connected? I mean, are they?
Sometimes yes, sometimes no.
Okay, and I guess that to me is kind of an important distinction, because if you have a system that is not connected to the internet at all, maybe that's fine. Maybe we don't care, because it is effectively, by just virtue of being really old, air gapped, and that's fine, but there's. Yeah, right, yeah. Can't hack the analog, but it's that class of technologies that are connected to the internet that can't do multi-factor authentication that I find very concerning. So I guess I can imagine if we're to move forward with some kind of rules around this, that we want to acknowledge that if you're air gapped, God bless and go forward, like whatever it is, right? Like it's, that there may be a distinction to make there, but, it seems like, it is so terrifying that it feels like it, I just want to say it out loud, that it feels like it's something that's worth addressing, and recognizing that might be a burden to some systems, but when people's health and safety is on the line. And anyway, I realize I'm getting into discussion or argument here, so I'll pull back from that, but I just wanted to make sure that, like, what we were talking about with these, the level of technology that we're talking about. Any other questions? Okay.
I just want to mention real quickly, Ben, I'm not sure who's gonna talk about it, but they did a survey 2 years ago, sorry, to categorize water systems and what the risk level would be. But again, we were helping a few systems fill out the survey and they weren't even aware of things. And, especially if the operators changed over recently, or sometimes we were talking to board members who may not be as aware of the operational technology. We were at one system and they said, oh, we don't have SCADA, we don't, we're not in the high risk category, and we're like, looking at the SCADA.
Oh, no.
So it's just to keep all the, if we are gonna develop requirements, just keep all those things in mind that. It's not, we're not Green Mountain Power,
Right.
this is like Bloomfield, Vermont, at the town water system, right? They don't have meters, but. But they do, it's also a types of technology on these systems.
Okay, that's fair. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. All right, and so with that, we would move on to Mr. Montrose from the Agency of Natural Resources. Welcome.
Thank you. Morning.
So yeah, I'm Ben Montrose. I'm the drinking water program manager for the Public Drinking Water Program under DEC, under the Agency of Natural Resources. My team and I regulate public drinking water systems. There's been a lot of talk this morning about what exactly that is, so I'm not going to really drill into that, but as Liz said, there's right now, as of this morning, 402 community water systems. So they serve either 15 connections or 25 people. That gets them in the door. And again, like Liz said, we deal with the population as the driver for being public or non-public, not the ownership structure. So a bit of program background. The point of our mission is to ensure the safe provision of public drinking water to public drinking water system users. So to make sure that the citizens and the business are protected. We do that through the state water supply rule. We establish regulatory standards that a water system needs to follow, includes day-to-day stuff, every little sample they take, all that sort of stuff. It also includes all construction, maintenance, and ongoing operation specifications. We also pull in a lot of the federal rules. So you might be familiar with lead and copper rule and things that happened in Flint, Michigan. That was the federal rule. We have that in Vermont. We pulled that into our state rule and about a dozen other similar federal rules. So we have the state rule and the federal rule all kind of stacks up to guide how we regulate systems. In terms of our current authority with metering, we have section 2.14 of our rule that says all water systems shall have an acceptable means of metering the finished water. So what that means is Joe Duncan has a big meter of all the water leaving the plant. That's what's required. That's very different than the thousands of users having meters in their basement to know how much water is being used. And those numbers are different because something might happen along the way that we don't know about. So from the agency perspective, we are very pro metering, we are very pro meters, we are very pro all of that sort of stuff, because as Joe was saying, it's a very important operational tool to use meters. One of the reasons meters are so important and so stressed is that very hardworking people like Joe and his team and Liz and her team go behind the scenes day in, day out to make the water happen. A lot of people take for granted, they turn on the faucet, they flush the toilet, there's the water. It's not that easy. It's a utility. It's a, you know, it takes money to generate water. So therefore kind of makes sense that you pay for what you get. So that's really important. We've had some initiatives lately for marketing campaigns, and we're very supportive of metering, things like that. So that all said, we don't get into the individual building. Our regulations do not include specifications about needing to install service meters, needing to maintain service meters, needing to do anything about service meters. So we don't have anything about smart meters or not, analog meters or not. We don't have any requirements about billing. We do not see data. We do not receive data. We never ask for data. What we get is what the system's making and what's going into the system. We'll work with systems that are having leaks. They may say, we know we're having a lot of water use over here, or, you know, things are up high, or we're dealing with a specific fire district that knows they have a 30-gallon-a-minute water demand at 2 o'clock in the morning. So we can engage with that, because that shouldn't be happening. So we work with this, but we don't get that. We don't have that data. We don't ever ask for it. Based on my experience, I've been with the program for 14 years. Joe touched upon a lot of this, but I just want to make sure we're all on the same page, and then I kind of like start broad and dip into a few very specific details for things. But we have a lot of systems that don't bill for water. We have a lot of systems that charge a water bill as part of a lot rent, such as through a manufactured housing community. We have systems that might bill annually. They might bill every 6 months. They might bill every quarter. It really depends on this again. Some of those bills are based on the number of bedrooms you have in your house. It might be just your residential versus commercial. It might be on actual water use and everything in between. Without measured billing, you know, we see measured billing as an equity issue, because you might have an elderly individual living in a home next door to a family of 5 who leaves the home, the hose on after a water balloon fight, and they pay the same. They may pay the same rate without metering, without them. So it is important for that. It allows the systems to understand what's going on in their system. Because we're in Vermont, a lot of meters are down low, they're below the frost, so they can survive the winter, because, you know. I'm sure you've seen and gone to, you know, warmer locations and you're walking down the sidewalk and you see this little bird cage on the sidewalk and it comes up and down, that's a meter. People can walk down the sidewalk and read the meter. They would freeze in Vermont. That's not an option here. So the meters are in basements, are in crawl spaces and places like that. So the use of smart metering or remote reading or whatever technical term you want to call it is really important because it prevents the need to knock on the door, go to the basement, crawl in the crawl space, read the meter, come back and repeat going down the street. So as Joe said, reading the meter can be as intensive as doing that or sitting in the office and getting that data in. Realistically, we're more towards the walking around, reading a meter, or walking up to a house and doing plunk and you receive the meter information, or what Joe does with his team and they drive around. That's more what we understand is the norm. Obviously, those all have associated pros and cons and associated expenses with doing so. And certainly doing multiple different things will cost more money than just doing it all the same way. And that to me is justified to have the expense of needing to read the meter. So I think broadly, the agency supports the use of smart meters where appropriate, where it can be done effectively and anticipate the benefits of not needing to send somebody to read, but that brings up the cybersecurity questions for sure. We don't currently have anything on the books for regulations pertaining to cybersecurity. There are no specific cybersecurity concerns. We probably could enforce against somebody if we had to with some general provisions of our rule, but we don't have regulations that say you need to do X, Y, Z. There are not currently federal regulations to do that either. So largely we adhere to the EPA standards. You know, EPA has more clout, more capacity to dig into the details and research all the vendors and manufacturers and do that sort of work, which we don't have the capacity for. In 2023, the EPA started pushing pretty hard on the topic of cyber. They distributed an interpretive memo saying, if states implement this one federal rule, which we do, then we feel that you have the authority to enforce cybersecurity problems. Our council said otherwise, many other states' councils said otherwise, and got into a little bit of push and pull. They then retracted that memo. They pivoted at that point to being more supportive and more outreach and more guidance based, which is what we have today. And that's what Joe was talking about. EPA specifically has a checklist for public water systems. It's one of the tools we rely on. That you go through and it's a vulnerability assessment for water systems. So that's one of the things we need on. We have partnerships with CISA and the FBI and Rural Water and a bunch of other really great groups. We've got really good partnerships. The good benefit of Vermont being small is that we get to know everybody, so it's really helpful. Rural Water has done a tremendous job in this space. They had a pilot situation which worked really well when it was happening, really got really good on the ground research and things out there. Some of the resources are national, some of the resources are virtual, some of them are out of state. And like Liz said, they want to call somebody, they want to see if they say no, they want somebody in their plant that they trust and know. And that's one of the services Rural Water provided. Is one of the things we try to do as part of our inspections. In terms of what is out there for regulations for cybersecurity, I said there's nothing, there's a book. So I misspoke earlier. There's the America's Water Infrastructure Act, which passed in 2018. It's a federal act that requires public drinking water systems that serve a population of 3,300 or more to generate a risk and resiliency assessment and an emergency response plan. Both of those documents include cybersecurity. We do not have anything to do with that process. That because of this is outside of cybersecurity. This is physical security. It's physical safety. It's a bunch of things. EPA requires it in their reg, and the water systems need to certify to EPA that they've done it. If the EPA comes out and does an inspection, which they have done for public water systems that serve over 10,000 population, EPA will come and do some inspections of those systems. They will call out if systems or do not have those plans or if they feel that they're insufficient. So that's good. Downside of that is there's only 34 systems in Vermont that need to have that. Not as And that's direct implementation from EPA, so it's something we want to see. EPA has completed their inspections of water systems over 10,000 in Vermont, only 8. They've done those inspections, they found some issues with cyber at a couple, and they flagged that. Right now, at least to my knowledge, this year, they don't plan to go back out to any other systems. So I'm not saying we're done with that work, but EPA's, the enforceability from EPA's standpoint is probably a couple few years into the future. They're not actively moving. So for the remaining water systems, of which there's multiple, we're working with them on a tiered basis to assess their vulnerabilities. Like Liz said, we developed a survey that we sent out to the contacts of public water systems just to assess like the most vulnerable kind of middle vulnerability or analog and offline and not vulnerable. So we called tier 1, 2, and 3. We got hopefully really good information about what the systems have for technology. And sometimes it's on the question you ask, right? We ask, do you have a computer that you can use to operate your system? Kind of meaning, can you sit here on the computer and something happens over there with a valve? And some operators said, yeah, I email you all the time with my computer. We meant to be a little different. So we followed up with a lot of those systems where they're like, oh yeah, we got this. And no, I don't think you do. The good thing, we know a lot of the systems, so we were able to clear that up. So we have a ranking tier 1, 2, and 3. Tier 3 is analog offline. A lot of systems are just offline. Tier 2 means a system that has the ability to receive information. So a good example for this is there's a storage tank up on the hill and the water system plant is in the valley and they're making water and they're pushing water up to the storage tank. There's a little ding at the top of the storage tank when it's full. And they get a ding on their phone or somewhere in their computer to say, oh, water's full. Or the other way is, oh, tank's empty. They'll get a ding or an alarm. So that's a tier 2 where they can't manipulate things, but they can get that information to say something's happening. You could hack in and turn that off and then drive over and do something. So there is a vulnerability there still, but it's a little less. So that's what we have as our tier 2 sites. And then the tier 1 sites are more what you think of when you're thinking of like, typing here and there was a valve open, or typing here and, the next town over, something changes, chemical feed, things like that. Those systems are vulnerable for sure, in varying levels and varying degrees. But one of the things that it didn't click for me when I was getting into the cyber world is, oh, we're small comparison. And there's a little bit of, false security with that narrative when it's like, oh, nobody's going to target East Nuclear. But what they're targeting is the tech. It's all of these companies around the world that are selling the tech, that are buying the tech. You might have this little touch screen. You might have this little, LED touch screen for your pumps that controls the pump rate. That little thing is going to have Wi-Fi compatibility. The smallest water system in Vermont could buy that. That's vulnerable. What the hackers are doing is they're aiming at the tech, not the victim. They're trying to find all the openings in that tech that they can find. So there are absolutely vulnerabilities in the state that need to be protected. With those tier 1 sites, we are going through every 3 years. We do a sanitary survey inspection of those community water systems. We ask them what's going on, what have they done. We're strongly encouraging them to have an in-person or virtual cybersecurity assessment to assess their vulnerabilities. We don't want that document. We don't want to put our eggs in one basket and then advertise the baskets over here, come find it, hack into it for us. So we're working with the systems to keep that information safe, but we're asking them to do those assessments, address their vulnerabilities where they can. As Liz said, a lot of time that's easier said than done. There's thousands of dollars worth of implementation equipment on their filters that integrates to an old computer that can't be updated. So it's not just as simple as updating that computer, it's every piece and part for multiple $1,000s between here. So it is a big lift. There's a lot of heartburn with, everybody needs to do this. And it's like, I can't. So there's a lot of friction there. More our concern is that physical control. It is manipulating something. It's cranking up a chemical. It's cranking down a chemical. It's things like that. That's what we're worried about. Like Joe said, usually the metering and the billing and the operations are siloed. They're pretty typically different things. In terms of the bill overall, really supportive of billing and metering, we're really supportive of cybersecurity protections. as Joe was saying, there's yet to point a finger and say you need to do this. The agency right now does not have the capacity to do this. The little bit of cyber work we do, like I explained with the vulnerabilities and recommending they contact experts. We are expert, I like to think we are experts in a lot of things, and computers and specific cybersecurity is not. That is a very technical world. It's a very specific world, and it's a very evolving one. So if we were to just generate an SOP and tack it to the wall, it's out of date as soon as it's printed. Because this world is spinning, this world is fast, and it's faster than I can be, faster than my team can be. Not to say it's not important, not to say it doesn't need to be addressed, but you know, one of the things, so I'm a member of the Association of State Drinking Water Administrators. One of the conversations we have, and I can hear some of my colleagues on that team in my brain, where they're like, we're worried about nation state intervention and countries hacking. What is Vermont gonna do against massive nation states? It's really, and then further, what is ANR gonna do? Like, potentially there's a world there for all of state service or broader than state service to play a role there. So I don't have an answer for you, unfortunately. I've got lots of ideas, happy to engage in conversations, but I feel it's bigger than us, bigger than what we can, definitely bigger than what we can handle right now. Yeah, I think that's broadly it. I'm happy to attempt to answer questions. I'm sure you have some more for me. I appreciate the opportunity to look at the bill and to engage in the dialogue. I think it's a really useful discussion to have for sure.
Yes, go ahead. Thanks, Ben. That's a lot of really helpful information. And I sense this sort of tension, which is, first of all, I hear you don't have the time or necessarily the expertise to do some of the stuff that's asked in here, but this tension, and it's sort of what I asked Liz, where we're saying there are systems out there that are not protected, either because they don't have the ability to do it or they haven't bothered to do it. And there are these threats out there. And I'm also hearing Vermont is not immune because it's about the tech, not about the location. But then you ended by saying Vermont's not gonna be able to do anything because it's much bigger than us. And so I think those are all somewhat contradictory, and I just wonder, what can we do that would be helpful? And frankly, I mean, as a lawmaker, that's what I do, that's what we all do. Like, our tool is to create laws to say, hey, you gotta do this thing because we're worried about this threat, and you're providing a public service, whether or not they are publicly owned. They are providing a public service, and somebody like Joe, who is a public water system that's a bunch of municipalities, they may have more of a sort of mentality of we're a public service, but some of the privately owned ones may not. I don't want to speculate too much, but they're having consistent, like, you're providing a public service. It is like one of the most fundamental basic things to have clean water. And if we're not protecting that and requiring it to be protected and even at the most basic level, then it doesn't feel like we're doing our job. And so I'm kind of searching for what is possible for us to say at the baseline, you have to do this.
Sure, yeah, and I think that's a great idea. I think starting really broad, like Joe and Liz were saying, don't put your password on a Post-it note, don't let everybody share a password. Like, no matter what tech you have, you can do that. Change your default passwords. I think that there's certain things like that that can rely on. I think started broad, like things like that versus really drilling into, you need to do X, Y, Z every year, report this. Like, I'm not suggesting that that's proposed, but the other end of that spectrum is really micro, and I think that there's a lot of problems with the micro approach. But if we started broad and had money and had grants and were able to bring people along through a process over a series of years, that could be great.
Yeah, we're probably not gonna have money in grants, I mean, you know that, but like, what is the baseline of what you can do, and we can say people need to do that. It doesn't cost money for people
Sure.
to change their password.
Sure.
They need a grant for that.
Yeah, that's. I float around this space, I'm not in the weeds with this space, I think I would be happy to put my heads together with Liz and Liz's team and others players. To generate something like that.
Okay,
I'd be happy to do that, that would be great, I mean, changing the passwords, all that sort of stuff is easy. There is the risk that as you write it down, it's like, what's next, or what else, what do we miss, so. There's certainly ways to cast a very broad net and work with our folks and create suggestions for sure. I'm reluctant to do that right now and say these are the four
Oh,
things
yeah.
and you're good.
okay, yeah.
I think getting
hear you.
input from someone like Sean Naylor or some of the other people that are on the advisory council would have to better.
Thanks.
That's interesting to think that maybe we could create the list of like, what is the basic level of hygiene, like cybersecurity hygiene that we can require? That doesn't cost any money. It's an interesting direction. Other thoughts, questions? Okay. Thank you. Yeah, it's super interesting. All right, at this point, before we move on, I think I want to take a break, and then we have a couple other people that maybe we can hear from. So let's take let's take a 5-minute break. Okay, all right, so this is again, so the Natural Resources and Energy coming back from a break. We're gonna go to someone who's not previous on our schedule, but is interested in this topic. Oh, he is now. Okay, thank you. Okay, great. Recent addition, Mr. Weiss, as a citizen of Montpelier, welcome.
Thank you, and thank you for fitting me into your schedule on short notice. I'm Thomas Weiss, resident of Montpelier, and I'm concerned about some of the privacy issues for the consumers with the two-way smart meters. I had a wireless meter in my house 25 years that gets read forwarded by the receiver being driven around the city. I've got no problems with that. My concern is with something with what Shelburne's doing. Having a two-way system that somebody can push a button in the central office and it reads the meters. I heard Joe Duncan say that one of the uses of that would be to take frequent meter readings so that if the usage gets up abnormally high, they can alert somebody that perhaps there's a water leak. And I mean, I heard him say that operations are separate from the billing department, but at some point, when the meters are used that way, the meter readings and the abnormality gets connected with something with the personal information. And so anyway, my concern is that I'm concerned with the privacy and it being connected. The billing department, if somewhere there's a connection between personal information and the increased water usage and the usage patterns of that person, and that billing department computer, my guess is internet connected. And so that database and information probably internet connected. So my concern is not having it read too often so that patterns can be built up and personal information and personal actions and personal privacy is compromised. So my suggestion is that even if it's two-way meter that can be read from the central office, that it be done no more than once a week. Reduce those problems. That's basically the thrust of my very short wish to speak to you today. And I did learn a lot from the previous speakers, so in short, what I hope.
Super, that's great. Any questions for Mr. Weiss? Okay.
So just to make sure I understand the concern, so the only thing that anybody could pick up would be water usage, right? So I'm just curious about what but I get there's a connection, I guess, between water usage and privacy. Well, it's not so big.
It's they develop a pattern. And so something somewhere, well, Mr. Duncan said it was on a chip and my meter down in my cellar, but I'm not sure about that. But I'm concerned about, if I'm not there for a long time, okay, somebody is into the system on the operation side, if they're getting that information. They know I'm not home, the house is on.
Okay.
That kind of thing, if it's read frequently enough. And so what I'm trying to get at is not to make it frequently, is not to allow it frequently enough to cause those pattern correlations that if the cybersecurity fails, it leads to problems for the building owners and occupants.
Or if somebody is theoretically then using it to figure out what you're doing.
That's right.
Yeah, okay.
Law enforcement, as well, he hasn't been home for 3 days, so where was he?
Right. Okay.
I mean, there is that as well.
It's helpful to have the example of like what specifically you might be concerned about, in that situation.
I mean, it's using it to track people's paths. I testified in other rooms in this building on data protection, data broker, and data privacy issues, and so that's a big concern with them. Since limiting what is out there.
Thank you very much.
You
I'm having a problem getting order,
Oh, okay. Should we
he's
take
going
a,
to zoom in, but I don't, he's not in the room yet, he said he is, but he's not.
okay,
Okay, so-
all right, well, let's take a break.
I'll try to get him.
Okay, sounds good.
Right, we're unmuted now. And he's coming. Thank you so much. All right, there he is.
Okay, super. And we are unmuted. All right, so this is Snre Resources and Energy coming back from a quick break. And we were welcoming Mr. Porter here from Department of Public Service. So welcome and thank you so much for being here.
Well, I'm glad I finally got here through a link, but for the record, thank you. I'm Jim Porter. I'm Director for Public Advocacy with Vermont Department of Public Service.
Thank you.
And
Oh, go right ahead.
so generally, I guess we're talking about S-213. I'm sorry, I've not heard previous testimony. The department is generally supportive of this bill. We've had, I think, a good experience with benefit for the customers and utilities that have implemented the smart meters. And I think that your opt-out provisions in here are very reasonable and probably meet the kind of the times. I'm one of the people who I think still pays to get paper credit card statements. I did finally give up on the bank statements, but I think it's a fair, compromise for the times in which we live. But are there any questions I could answer about the bill?
Well, yes, go ahead. Well, I would love to know a little bit more about your role in all of this. So you're with the public advocacy. So can you just tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. So I'm the director for public advocacy, which is the legal division at the Department of Public Service, and we're statutory parties to all proceedings before the Public Utility Commission. I had a role with the smart grid rollout maybe 15 years ago with the department. And at that time, it was really more of a new thing. And I think there was a lot less wireless activity in our homes than maybe we have today. And that was when, I guess, largely Green Mountain Power was installing their smart meters, and it was a fairly seamless transition. There were some blips in the road that also allowed for an opt-out provision, but it was certainly have not heard much about smart meters in any of the utilities that we regulate for quite some time.
Okay, yes, go ahead.
Thanks, James. This is Senator Hardy. I have two questions. One, you mentioned the electric companies and then also gas companies. There is a provision in law that says that people can opt out of having smart meters for them, but they don't charge, or they're not allowed to charge. Do you see should they be allowed to? And do you see a difference between water and electric and gas in that area? So that's my first question. And the second is, before you joined, we had a sort of robust conversation about cybersecurity. And I'm just wondering, from your perspective, what are you all seeing with cybersecurity for utilities, and what would your recommendations there be?
So there was, when the initial smart grid went in with the electric utilities, and I believe BGS, there was a proceeding before the Public Utility Commission, and there were certain cybersecurity principles that were put in place that the utilities had to abide by. It looks like you've got a certification in your bill where there would have to be a cybersecurity measures and certification to that effect. The one difference I think here is the department and the Public Utility Commission only regulate a relatively small number of water companies. So for instance, we have no regulatory authority over municipal water systems.
Okay.
But it does look like you've covered that in a way that I think is probably more appropriate for the water companies than the proceeding we had with the electrics years ago.
Okay, great. And what about the first question about the smart meter differences between electric and gas versus water in terms of the charging for opting out?
So what I can tell you is there were, when we had what I'll call the initial run of the smart meters being installed, the wireless smart meters. There were concerns about privacy, and there were concerns about the RF, the radio frequency emissions. And so we took the position at that time that people should be able to opt out at no cost. Fast forward 15 years or so, kind of, it's what I was addressing with, now you have to pay to get paper statements if you're someone who still wants that, or most entities charge that. So I don't really know that that we have a position on whether it should be no charge or a charge. But I do think what you've got in here is reasonable from a customer perspective.
Great, thank you.
It's super interesting. All right, any other questions? Okay. Well, super. With that, thank you so much. Appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you.
I think that is the end of all the folks we have lined up for today.